Well, hello everybody. Here we are again, Mind Science TV, where we interview the interesting, the informed, the expert, and I think I've got someone who qualifies for all those names, and it's a wonderful person who I've known for a fair while now, a few years. We've sort of got to know each other through our professional interests. Terry Marks-Tarlow. Terry, welcome to Mind Science TV.
Thanks so much, Richard. It's great to be here.
Yes, everybody says that. That's because it's the beginning of the interview. It's always a good thing to get them to say nice things before you grill them. But no, there's no grilling here, as everybody knows. It's a place for conversations with people about what they're doing and what's happening. You've heard some already from Egypt. You've heard some from our American counterparts. But Terry's done something which I think is so important and necessary in the area of psychotherapy and in psychotherapeutic practice. And she's put it down in a book form, which is wonderful. Although she speaks regularly around the place, so you can hear her talk as well. But she's written a fabulous new book, and I'm going to get her to tell me the exact title of it, because I bet you I'll say it wrong. So I'll get Terry to say it. And it's talking about intuition, psychotherapy and intuition in psychotherapy. And it's really important. It's part of the interpersonal neurobiology series. And there she's, you've got a copy of the book. Terry,
Yes.
Quickly tell us this. Put a little bit to the center there. Clinical intuition in psychotherapy, the neurobiology of embodied response. That's fantastic. And I'll show a quick, we got an image of the cover. So that must be actually still warm, that copy. This is like you just got that yesterday or something.
Yes, exactly. I think this is the first and perhaps the only bound copy, with the other books coming out in a couple of weeks.
Fantastic. So a couple of weeks now. That'll be around about this time. As most people know, we pre-record these interviews. So round about the time you're seeing this interview, this book will be out there. Rush out to your bookstore and grab it. I know we haven't talked about it yet, but I just want to preempt. I think it's an important book. More than just a nice book and an interesting sideline and sort of another way of looking at interpersonal neurobiology. I think it gets down to some of the fundamental principles of what makes this process of doing therapy, where you actually have to not just follow the manual. There's a point at which it's like anything, like in music, like when you play piano. There's a point at which you move away from the melody and you move away from the strict thing, and you have to improvise because clients almost demand it. This area of intuition has been a bit of a, I don't know whether it's a taboo subject, but it's a subject that concerns the evidence-based, science regimented stuff. But there's a lot of science in intuition. And I wonder if you might just initially just give us some reflections on writing the book, what brought you to it, and some of the program of putting it all together.
Sure. The first book that I did was called Creativity Inside Out, Learning Through Multiple Intelligences. And so I've been interested in creativity for decades, really. And that was a book for educators. It was a creativity curriculum. And Howard Gardner wrote the foreword for that one.
Oh, wow.
But I wrote the book, and then I decided, well, I'm not an educator. I don't work with kids. I don't really work with teachers. And so I didn't ever really do anything with the book. And the idea of creativity, although in my personal life, I've drawn and I've danced and I feel immersed in the arts. In my professional life, I had the feeling that this was just fluff. I felt guilty when I first realized that this was the area that interested me the most. I felt guilty, as if I wasn't getting down to the real stuff, that somehow this is too light and it's not substantive enough, and I should be more interested in pathology and this sort of thing. And so that that book came out in somewhere, I think, I think it was in 1990. I'm not exactly sure when that one came out, but I think it's taken me all this time to cycle back round to the fact that our creativity, that healing is a creative process intrinsically, that people cannot change without going somewhere new, and if they go somewhere new, it's fundamentally a creative process. And so I think I have a more solid feeling about my foundation to be able to say that this isn't just fluff, this isn't just icing on the cake, this is the cake itself. Um,
And I think this is something that I just want to sort of highlight that and amplify it. In fact, I think your first book back then was prescient. I think that's why you were so unsure about it, because it wasn't what was being talked about. And I know it's very much in line, and this is why I've been so interested in your work, because it resonates so much with mine. I mean, when I had a very sad suicide in one of the young members in our family, I I dealt a great deal with the idea of hope, because we talk about hope and hopelessness. And I thought, how is it possible that we lose hope? And I thought about it. My conclusion, and this was, sort of, again, late 1990s, so before I really, became as educated as I am. So I understand it more now. But my thought was, you can't lose hope. So there's something to do with the definition of it. And so I wrote a little book called Choose Hope, which was kind of just motivation stories, and it was kind of cute. But the thesis of it was really strong, is that if hope is our capacity to create something new, and that if
mhm,
human beings actually are human beings because they create something new and
mhm,
respond to their environment with a creative response, not sort of singing and making art, just creative, adjusting and adapting and moderating their behaviours, then
right,
you actually can't lose hope. I'm sorry to
right.
come in there, but it's such a beautiful thing. I wanted to contribute a bit. So please go on a bit
Yes.
more, because I know that was a part of the journey. We've got another book coming up in your experience before this one, which if you could talk about
That's
that a
true.
bit more.
So I abandoned that one pretty much immediately, just let it float out and do its own thing, which, by the way, it's still in press, and
Oh, good.
I just heard from my publisher there, Stuart Brewster, that he still loves that book, and he talked about taking risks with me and using intuition uh, in choosing his authors, which I remember that time, that he wasn't sure, and then suddenly he switched gears and decided to go with me, even though I'm not an educator. Um, but so I dropped that one, and got very interested in nonlinear science, and spent about 15 years studying nonlinear science. And my next book applied nonlinear science uh, to clinical practice. Now, the way I saw the relationship between the first and second book was, I wrote creativity inside out because I wasn't ready to be creative. I was just looking on the outside, and I just didn't feel ready to. I didn't know how I was trying to be creative. And then when I wrote Psyche's Veil, which took me 12 years, and they were painstaking years, and I had 3 different drafts, and I threw them away, and I reconstituted parts of it, and really had a lot of angst about whether I was crazy, whether this was true, what I saw, the vision that I saw. I really thought it was going to change all of psychology, uh, to change the paradigm from linear to nonlinear. And so I conceptualized myself as diving into my own creativity at that time. And I also illustrated that one, and was very happy with what came out. But I think that whole process of being in agony and being so unsure of myself reflected itself in that being kind of a scary book for people. It's all math and science, and it's more conceptually based and theoretical, even though it's got cases as well. Um, and uh, but it's a difficult book. So then I realized after I finished that one that it was hard to connect with people through that
Oh.
way
Oh.
of approaching,
Mm.
and because it's so outside the norm of psychology anyway. I did connect with, I think you know that I was able to write an opera libretto based on that book
Yes, you
on
did.
a yes on a composer in New York City at Juilliard who puts fractals in his music, asking me to put fractals in the words, which was lovely. Um, but aside from that sort of wild fairy tale ride, I wasn't connecting that easily with people through that book. And so the clinical intuition book became a way where I tucked the nonlinear science implicitly in the book because intuition is nonlinear, creativity is nonlinear, change in therapy is nonlinear. And so I didn't really talk about it too much. And my hope was by choosing a subject that we all know implicitly that I'd connect better with people and through the work, that there'd be something magnetic about it because I think we can all say as clinicians that we do all use our intuition all the time. And it's just a matter of being aware of that and then what we can do when we become more aware of it. So I thought it would be um, implicitly more attractive,
Mm.
and an easier topic for people um, to resonate with. And then the other thing that happened aesthetically, I had and so by the way, after taking 12 years to write Psyche's Veil, this one popped out in about probably 6 months. I mean, it really came quickly. And so I think I was channeling with my intuition, the book, which is nice. But another thing happened that I used to really like complexity as an aesthetic. So things that looked more complex or seemed more complex appealed to me more. But
Mm.
I've shifted and realized that in order to really understand something, you have to be able to say it simply. And so I shifted my aesthetic from Psyche's Veil to this book and tried to be very, very simple in how I used language and constructed sentences and presented ideas, and I shifted from an abstract uh, platform where clinical stories were tied to the abstraction to I tell stories and then pull ideas and science out of the stories. And so that too I hoped would be more uh, intuitively appealing.
Well,
So
I
that's the
think,
story.
yeah, I mean, it's a great story. It's a great passage through. I mean, as you know, I also found myself studying complexity theory and nonlinear science as we've described it. And I'll speak a little bit about it because I think that might help some of our
Yes.
listeners. But and I think Psyche's Veil again is prescient because you were talking about a subject before its time, but now we're starting to talk about it. I know I actually am beginning to look at complexity theory as really simple, um, and I think this is what you bring out in the book
Yeah.
because all that really this nonlinear science and complexity stuff, all it means is that there's a degree to which the system has its own way of organizing itself. In Psyche's Veil, it's there. I agree that it's a bit harder to find. In this one, it's just on a platter. By the end of the first chapter, I'm going, oh yeah,
Oh, yeah.
which is cool.
Ex- Excellent. It's true. And along with what you're describing of systems being self-organizing is the idea of emergent change, so that the change happens in a way where you can't look at what went before or what's underneath it and be able to predict it's coming. And that's really how intuition works as well.
And so true. And a lot of this talk that's going on now, we're very busy now in right hemisphere. I mean, Alan Shaw, of course, has been leading this charge for a long time, but it's also, he was prescient. He's coming in, it's coming into its discussion, Ian McGilchrist's work as well. And we're starting to say, oh, okay, so the right hemisphere's off there, it's the darling of the world and it will save us all. But that's actually not what anybody's saying. It's certainly saying that the right hemisphere doesn't operate in these linear processes as linearly as the left does, because the left is non-linear as well in its time. But if your right and left hemisphere have an overriding, have an underlying rule or underlying intention of trauma or of the problems caused by trauma, then that is going to send your self-organizing system into a dysfunctional organization pattern.
Yes, I think that's right. And when people get more integrated, when their right side and left side or various subcomponents get more integrated, there is a simplicity to that as well.
Now, I like the second chapter and the fourth chapter particularly. I love everything. I mean, all you've got to do is actually have a look at the chapter list, and I haven't memorized everything. This chapter list is just so inviting. Flashes, hunches, and gut feeling. You know, that's chapter one. That was the one. By the time I finished reading that, I thought, oh, I love this book. Implicit processes, empathetic roots, play, survival of the wittiest. That's so great. Lighting the way, and this beautiful last chapter, navigating the seas. I just read those and I feel better.
There's more. Isn't there?
There is some more.
There's also one on wisdom in pursuit of wisdom is the final one.
How on earth I couldn't put that one in there? Maybe I'm not wise enough yet to.
You're not old enough to. You're not old enough to do that.
I'd love you to speak a little bit to this implicit idea. I mean, in the chapter you go through, I mean, this isn't just Terry Marks-Tarlow saying, I think this and I think that. This is beautifully referenced and ranged through many, many thinkers. I mean, there's names like Kahneman and Gene Houston, and it just goes on and on and on there. But I'd just like you to give some sort of a bit more insight into this idea of the implicit that you talk about in chapter 2. And you can, bring in any other chapters you want, of course,
Right. No, I'm happy to. I guess the thing that comes to my mind first, well, okay, let's start with implicit versus explicit, which is probably the most basic difference. Is the implicit is more coming from the unconscious. It has to do with responses that are subcortical usually, so they're fast acting, they're automatic, they're non-deliberate, so there's an ease to that way of operating, versus the explicit level, which is conscious and deliberate. It's full of effort. It invokes will and decision making, whereas implicit doesn't involve decisions at all. And it's another maybe good way of contrasting is implicit is part of that is procedural learning. So when we do things like riding a bike or things that involve complex motor skills, that's all implicit at the implicit level. And it involves learning from context. And that's one of the big things. The right hemisphere, as you were saying, is one that is steeped in context. And McGilchrist really brings that out, the importance of context, as opposed to the left hemisphere, which abstracts from context and pulls out of context in order to come up with a general principle. So the implicit level is completely immersed in the details and the sensory experience and the body as context and the relationship as context. And that's really where we clinicians live.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, everybody out there, are you taking the same breath I am? That's where we live. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's just great. This just brings to mind uh, one of the images. You sent me a few images to have a look at, because I know the book has got lovely images, and many of which you do yourself. Lovely artist. Ladies and gentlemen, she's a gorgeous dancer. You should, yeah, amazing. Anyway, but there's that beautiful image that you've drawn of the whole body. Can I bring that up and you speak to that a little bit? Maybe some of the other images you've sent, because I'd love to see that. Now, I have to do a little bit of technical fiddling. So I now have to look at my screen and I have to do a screen share. This will just take a second or two. Won't take long. This one.
I think I was inspired by Eat, Pray, and Love, the book, Elizabeth Gilbert's book.
Yes.
Because she talks about emotional spaces as territories, as having a spatial grid, and some of that comes out in one of the later chapters of the book. But in my mind, to have a territory, to have intuition be a territory with a spatial extension to it, what is a great way of making it more real, of really concretizing it. So that's really what I was trying to do in this. And so I try to capture everything from spontaneous breakthroughs, being part of clinical intuition, to sudden insight, procedural memory, which I was just talking about, that has to do with the body's memory of sequences and complex context, sudden flashes, improv you were talking about. There are a number of people that view psychotherapy as an improv kind of process, or as jazz improvisation. The realm of the imagination, I think the visual realm of the imagination is key. Having imagery, being able to imagine a future that's different than the past. Instincts ties us in with animals, and the way that the intuition, clinical intuition, really taps into some of the subcortical circuits that Panksepp identified that we share in common with other mammals, which we can talk about if you want to. But the three that I emphasize in the book are the seeking circuit, which is the really basic part of us by which we want to go out and get rewarding experiences. The care circuit, by which mammals bond and teach their young, and the play circuit, which I know you're going to you're wanting to talk about. Back to this territory.
Yeah, and I was just going to say that, and this is when you start talking about complexity theory and nonlinear theory, those three elements there, they're sort of the organizing rules that we all have. And I think the fact that you bring them out, I mean, Panksepp has done this work with play, and he's also done this work with seeking so beautifully. But he's actually can get a bit complex. And I think the way you've talked about it and the way you've described it, it really brings it to life for me. Because I think it's also important to just, when people, they look at a drawing like this and they say, oh yes, so you're left braining the right brain. And actually, that's true. I mean, McGilchrist said this. It's when the right brain can utilize the left brain to amplify itself and bring itself into conscious awareness. It's just when the left brain dominates, it tends to kind of not care about the right side so much. It can overpower all these wonderful things that you're putting through there. And this drawing, to me, if I'm sitting there getting to left brain, I'm going to, print this out or do something. I just look at that and go, no, just a minute. Look, it's all connected. Let go, and this drawing inspires me to let go of having to dominate with my left side. And
Mm,
that's why I like it.
that's oh, that's great. Yeah, I think one of the things I really try to do is exactly what you're saying, is use the right brain to illuminate what otherwise might be left brain descriptions. And your phrase of letting go is such a good one, because we have to let go into intuition. We can't strive for it. We can't hold on or try harder. It's really more like a relaxation than it is an effortful kind of thing. So I'm glad you're inspired to let go when you look at this.
And because all our left brain activity, of which our culture is very constructed from, says control, own, dominate, be in charge of, set rigid goals and so on and so forth. And
Hmm.
what you're letting go into is something that's had several million years to organize itself and figure out how to do things more successfully. And,
Yes.
and it
And
even tells you if it's doing it badly by, and it needs some help. Whereas the left brain, doesn't.
right, right. And as you say that, I realize too that this drawing, um, that part of letting go, for example, is the exploration process.
Mm.
When we explore, then we're letting go and just looking for novelty, seeking novelty. And so by picturing the intuition as a territory, it almost encourages the very activity that it is.
Mm. Yeah. Now, there's a couple of other images here. Would you like to speak to some more now, or what are you feeling like
It's
doing?
it's up to you, wherever you want to go.
That's fantastic. I'd like to go out for coffee. Now, okay, let's go down a page. Now, this image is after that beautiful image. This is quite a difficult image.
Oh,
So you're not
yes, it
you're
is.
not scared to be strong in this book.
Right. I want to be evocative, emotionally evocative, and I put this one together myself. It wasn't that easy to put together this image, both emotionally, but also it's just difficult to find the materials. But this image is of a little monkey called Britches, who was rescued from a lab, an animal lab, and I chose it. It's a before and after picture, and the before, as you can see, this Britches eyelids are sewn shut for the experiment, and
Mm.
so you can see the tension on this little monkey's face when the researchers found him, and how he's sucking his thumb for comfort. Um, and so one of the reasons that I put this image in, so this is a before and after shot of Britches, and you can see the after shot, how relaxed his face is, and with his eyes wide open, and he's just so much more comfortable and soft looking. And my recollection is that this was the chapter that was looking at these circuits that we're talking about, and the care circuit in particular, and the importance um, of feeling secure and having a secure bond for animals, mammals, and human children to feel secure enough to play. And so, and a monkey who is stressed and insecure and unsafe will not play, and the same is true for human children. And so um, that's that's where this picture came from.
Yeah, and it's so good. I mean, look at in the recovered state, that wonderful expression of you care, I care. This just I mean, obviously a primate is going to do it very differently from the way we do it, although not that differently. Let's just
Yes.
move on to one more, because we don't want to leave people with that one. Let's move on to one that's just a little bit more on the other end of the stick.
but also an animal picture.
Yes.
So this one is a fabulous story that I just loved finding the story of Mila the whale, um, who wound up um, saving this drowning diver. And this is again the idea of the care circuit and empathy, that empathy really comes out of this mammalian care circuit, and apparently there's an interspecies quality to it, and this picture tells the whole thing. This was a woman in Japan who was in a diving contest, and it was in an Arctic tank where the water was very, very cold, and the divers were told to go in without any tanks on their backs. And they went down and held their breath, and I believe the contest was who could hold the breath the longest. And when this lady went down, she got a severe cramp in her in both legs, and instead of being able to float and being able to go back up, she started to sink. And these whales, there were a number of whales in the tank. This whale, Mila, came forward to rescue this woman, and she must have sensed. This is, by the way, it's a female whale, and she must have sensed that the diver was in trouble, probably the same way that humans sense that other humans are in distress through the amygdala. Whales have very large amygdalae, and so the first picture shows Mila coming over and righting the diver who's going down head first, and the second picture shows Mila lifting the diver to the surface of the water, and the diver was in a total panic and thought she was going to die, and then suddenly felt herself being lifted by Mila.
By golly, that must have felt like God.
Yes, and one of the interesting things about this is when we are drowning and literally in a panic, um, which is what the whale must have picked up. It's the same experience as separation anxiety. It's the same circuit.
And we're now dancing in Stephen Porges' polyvagal explanations and things, and understanding the way in which our bodies deliberately and purposefully change. And look, here's the example that one of the reasons why our body goes into some of these stress states and these difficult states and these overwhelmed states is so we can give the messages through our interpersonal relationship to others to take action.
Yes.
And this is all intuitive. Let's just look at one more, because I think there's one more here that that is one. Yes, here's one of your drawings. Aren't you fun? And I think we're into play a bit here. That's gorgeous.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I was happy that one got a full page of the book, which made me happy. And by the way, these drawings, I took the liberty of sending them all in color to you, but in the book they're all black and white. So the viewers.
What a wonderful thing for our listeners and viewers. So we get the color version, and you can say to all your friends who are reading the book, "Oh, I've seen them in color," which is fantastic. But speak a little to this.
Sure. This one is called Safe Surprises, and it is stimulated by Philip Bromberg, who is a New York psychoanalyst who likes to use the phrase, probably coined it in our field, of safe surprises. Really, we could say this is a form of play. This might be a good way to segue over into your interest in that chapter, that coming upon when there's safety in the relationship, enough safety, then both people can come together to a place of surprise.
Mm,
And that, of course, is finding something novel, because
mm,
if what we come across in the relationship is perfectly predictable, or it's something that replicates what we've had before, um, then we're not in any new territory.
mm,
So the idea of safe surprises is kind of stumbling across novelty together. And of course, in this drawing, the surprise is that the baby, instead of on the outside of the jack-in-the-box playing with the jack-in-the-box, the baby is part of the jack-in-the-box instead. And
mm.
so there's a reversal of what's inside and outside in this drawing, which is oftentimes what happens in therapy in the deepest moments. And so I was trying to capture both intersubjective space that way, but also that reversal of inside and outside, such as I find that when people really sink to their deepest level of understanding their issues, then they begin to see how we begin to see how we generate the conditions for what happens to us, what the universe appears to throw our way. Actually, we can sense where inside we um, resonate with that. And I'm not meaning to be new age about it. I'm not saying that we create the universe, but more that there just is this feeling of reversal of what's inside and what's outside. It's hard to put into words. I
No,
hope you know what
it's
I'm talking.
you're doing it beautifully, and the picture helps to give a right and left, integration in the activity. I mean, what I'm thinking. Let me tell you just my thoughts, and because I think this is one of the things that's going on a lot, and what you might be saying, and please correct it and add to it. But just this feeling that we've had a sense. I mean, I remember Fritz Perls. What did he say? It was safe endangerment or safe difficulty, and
Mm,
this talk that we have of that we need to push people into some degree of anxiety in order for them to move forward, to get creative. And I think that's true, but we've used these words of, safe difficulty, safe danger, or some degree of anxiety. And
mhm,
I'm just wondering if whether you're saying the sort of area that I'm sort of thinking too, is that we can send people into this area, but it's actually safe surprise, safe fascination, safe
mhm,
interest. And that actually through fascination, through seeking caring and, uh, that sense of engagement into personal stuff, that
mhm,
we don't actually have to be anxious in order to create. We can be
mhm.
fascinated, we can be intrigued, and
Right,
that be just as successful, and it's even more safe. What do you think
right.
about that?
I like that. I like that way of putting it. I think the line between what's safe and unsafe is a very, very thin one,
Mm, mm,
which the Jack in the Box really illustrates. The Jack in the Box, the sudden uh, appearance of this thing coming out of the box initially scares the baby, and yet becomes the thing that was initially scary, oh, just quickly turns into glee. And so the line between what's scary and what's gleeful is very, very thin, and helps to stretch our boundaries of what's okay for venturing into the unknown.
and
And of
it's
course,
sort of
we need to help our patients be willing to do that, because if they're just going to stay safe, then they're going to stay with what's familiar, no matter how unpleasant and painful that might be.
and these ideas that the system, if you give it a bit of trust and work on the things that are hurting it, so to hold those back, to lift that sense of fascination, it almost is like saying, no, we're not going into a dark and deep and mysteriously horrible territory that you're going to then finally drag yourself out of, where actually your body desires to seek something that is to do with caring and connection and engagement. And although initially you have to be prepared for the saber-tooth tiger, um, if you also believe that it's possible that it's the fun Jack in the Box you got here, that this is actually going to help therapists do the same therapies they've been doing forever. I think what your book does is not say do a different therapy, but this is a way in which you can understand the places you're taking your client to give them a greater sense of joy in taking the risk.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And so two things about what you're saying. One is that we're already doing this stuff. It's not something that we have to figure out how to do. We're already doing it, and it underscores that. And the second is this whole area of the positive realm, which I think especially for those of us who enjoy doing long-term and deep work, which is exactly the kind of work I like to do the most, that people have to make the shift from I'm only in therapy because I'm in such crisis. I just can't even stand my life, and I'm desperate, and I'm forced to go seek help. Got to make the shift from that to, gee, the psyche is a fascinating place, and even though it can be painful or scary um, or difficult and frustrating, it's beautiful. Just the patterns and the possibilities and the insights available are still beautiful and fascinating. And that's when we hook into the seeking circuit. So I think those of us who like to do long-term work, and um, when people really get hooked on that, then their seeking circuit is in gear, and the curiosity, the fascination, the joy, etc., just in seeing the patterns and getting new insights um, becomes possible.
Absolutely. Let me just take a second. We'll come back to our faces. I'll just drop these images out,
Okay.
and we have a, oh, there we go. I don't know whether that actually goes on the recording, but I have a lovely lady that says screen sharing has stopped.
Oh,
Wow.
I didn't see that.
Oh, well, it's very scary being the presenter.
So.
So this is just, we're probably going to have to wind up in a minute, but what a lovely area that we've wandered through this sort of description of you're writing a book, which is all very good. Um, uh, but we wandered through this thing of what it is like, this experience going on in the room. And what I think you say and what you've been doing there is this can be done with a sense of joy despite its difficulty.
Hmm. Absolutely. Hmm.
And that's what an amazing thing is. I think we best wind up. Is there something you want to conclude? I think if you could just fill us in on a couple of the things that you're doing over the next few months. I know you're going to England with the Tavistock group. Could you tell us about that? And have you got any uh, particular meetings going on later on in the year? And where can we get the book?
Um, yeah, I just want to say one more thing about the sense of joy, because it brings to my mind um, that kind of positive feeling about the work, I think, is a real antidote to us for not getting burnt out and not having compassion fatigue, and allowing us to continue the work decade after decade, which I'm now going into my third decade, I think, of clinical work. And I'm more excited about the work that I do than ever, I feel. And even though I have some very difficult cases at times and very tragic and sad things. So I think the joy is it's palpable, and it's really important as protection for us. Um, but let's see, a couple of things I'm doing. I have a talk coming up soon at Rice Davis in Los Angeles on igniting children's passions, which is about the imagination and play, and the importance of that to children, and the importance of play in helping children move from fantasy life and the creative imagination of childhood into the ability as adults to bring vision into life and continue imagining wonderful futures and then manifesting them and embodying them and having imagination be a portal into reality instead of a defense against it. And then in May, I'm going to London, as you mentioned, to Tavistock, where there's a conference centered around Psyche's Veil that I'm very excited about. So this will be
Cool.
it'll be nonlinear science and psychoanalysis and social policy, and that will be on May 18th. And
And you can
people
soften the
can
book
come.
there.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And I'll have 2 books to bring to that conference. So
Yes.
maybe it's been slow coming, but this is a great conference. This is an honor to have this conference spring up around Psyche's Veil. And people can get the book either through Norton's website. That's www.norton.com, I believe, or they can get the book. That may not be quite the website. It might be www Norton. I'm not sure, but they can find it either through Norton or through Amazon, and it should be available. I think on Amazon it is available as of mid-April, but they can pre-order the book as of now. But as you mentioned, by the time people might be seeing this, the book will be ready to ship out.
Yes, I think yeah, we'll probably be at that stage, but that's fine. This will be a boost to get everybody keen. So, well, folks, I mean, we could just go on and on and on. We've just scratched the surface of what goes on in this book, and what so many of you I know feel when you're working, and you say, "My God, I get this intuitive, I get this sense, I get this stuff." I mean, Erickson talked about it all the time. Respond to your stuff, utilize what's going on, and I really think that if your left brain is having a bit of trouble kind of dealing with this more intuitive side, if it finds it too disorganized or too difficult, you read this book, and I think we will send a lot of calming aspects, and you will give yourself much more permission to let go, not to give in, but to let go, like the improvising piano player. And I do a little bit of that myself, and it is just such fun. And then to see the results afterwards will be wonderful. And the results we have is not just a dance or a picture or a song. It's actually the quality and the improvement of human life. What a joyous job to be in. Terry, thank you so much, so much. Another wonderful experience for me as interviewer, and I hope for everybody out there listening to Mind Science TV. And I just say thank you, and I hope well, before too long we'll have a webinar. We must have a stronger talk about this. But thank you so much for today.
Oh, you're very welcome. Thank you, Richard. I really appreciate the opportunity.